so much. Great to be here. I will not nearly live up to that presentation. That was fantastic. Really appreciate it. First of all, what a privilege to be here. Always great to be with AFP. It's a fantastic organization. We rely on AFP, on Capitol Hill, on a weekly basis, and that is not an exaggeration about them specifically. We work together. If you don't know our chairman, Jim Jordan of Ohio, I encourage you to get to know him. He's a fantastic guy. He's a two-time NCAA championship wrestler, and that comes out in his politics as well as his personality. He has led the RSC, I think, to its most successful year ever. We are here basically to advance, if you will, pull and force. What do I mean by that? We want to advance a conservative economic, social, and national security agenda on the Hill. We want to pull the GOP to the right, including leadership. And by golly, we want to force conservative solutions into law any way we can. Are we having tremendous success? Unfortunately, no. But the arrow is going in the right direction, frankly, from activists like you backing us up. The good news about spending, believe it or not, there is some good news, is the culture of spending on the Hill has shifted. What do I mean by that? Because you can say, well, what are you talking about? I've been on the Hill for about 11 and a half years. In the old days, the beginning of my time on the Hill, conservatives and Republican leaders, or establishment, whatever you want to call them, were going in exactly opposite directions on spending. Conservatives said we need to cut spending, reduce the size and scope of government. The Republican leadership was doing the exact opposite. We want to grow government, grow spending, increase the number of federal workers, increase the number of federal agencies. Dan is exactly right to lump Bush and Obama together on these charts. We were fighting against our own president on spending during that time. That's changed. Conservatives and House leaders and, if you will, establishment Republicans are at least swimming in the same direction in the stream. Now, obviously, conservatives would swim a lot faster and do things a little bit differently, but they're at least going in the right direction together, and that has changed the culture on the Hill. It's no longer cool to want to spend. It used to be cool. It used to be, how could we best send tax dollars to earmarked projects, or even if it wasn't an earmarked project, let's just create a new agency that has its headquarters in the district of a congressman who's going to have a tough re-election. That was very, very common. No longer cool to do that. That's great. That's the good news. The conversation is now about how much do we cut, not whether we cut. Now again, sometimes we disagree and sometimes we fall short. But the conversation, the acceptable mode of speaking on the Hill is no longer should we increase, should we not increase. It is we will increase, we will decrease, how much, when, how fast, where, that kind of thing. That's good news. The Constitution is cool on the Hill. It hasn't been for the time that I've been on the Hill until recently. I remember having conversations with some Rules Committee staffers in the past, bringing up, how could we allow this bill to come to the floor? It was very unconstitutional, pretty easily unconstitutional. Silence. Total silence. Sometimes laughter. Usually just kind of an ugly, evil stare. What are you talking about? The Constitution. Well, that's changed. It's cool. It's cool now to talk about the Constitution, and not just for the sake of talking about the Constitution, but for the fact that it embodies the values we all in this room hold dear, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness were given to us not by government, but by God, and they are protected, supposed to be protected by government. That's the prevailing wisdom now that goes around in Republican circles on the Hill. And as a result, the vast majority of Republicans believe that we should get up in the morning, our feet hit the floor, and figure out ways that the government should do less with less, so that you guys can do more with more. And I think that's really starting to be the prevailing wisdom on the Hill. It's seen not just as an economic problem, but as these gentlemen have already said, a moral problem. When you're leaving this kind of fiscal legacy to your kids and grandkids, that's not just an economic problem. That is a moral crisis. And that's how we see it, and that's how we approach each day. Let me shock you with a couple of numbers, believe it or not, that I know you were probably shocked already by Dan's charts. A couple other shocking numbers to set the context. We talk a lot about interest. That's getting a lot of chatter these days because the numbers are staggering. CBO just came out, the Congressional Budget Office just came out with a report that said over the next 10 years, they're projecting this country will spend $4.45 trillion in interest. So you get nothing for that. That's just paying back the banks for the spending that we're doing now and in the past. The fiscal year 2012 number by itself, $238 billion in interest. That's just interest. Let me put that a little bit in context for you. I brought a few comparison notes here. That number for 2012 interest is larger than total federal spending was in 1973. Total federal spending was less than the interest payment they're projecting for next year. That figure is also larger than any deficit in U.S. history up until 1991. So pretty recently. That figure, the interest figure for 2012, $238 billion, also larger than 28 of our U.S. state economies, and larger than the entire GDP of 80% of the world's countries. So these are annoyingly scary numbers, and that's the context that we work in every day. We'd like to think we have some solutions on the table. The biggest one that we have pushed and continue to push, and hopefully you've heard of it, is called cut, cap, and balance. Not sure if you've heard of it, but it's something. Oh, good. I appreciate it. That's good to know. You know, sometimes you send out emails in Washington with no one who's actually reading it and whether it's getting out there. Glad to see it's getting out there. So I don't need to go into too much detail about it, but the quick summary was members of Congress in the Republican Study Committee, the conservatives, sat around and said, we don't really want to raise the debt ceiling. We really don't. However, the political reality is as such that we're probably going to have to raise it somewhat at some point. What should we get in exchange for it? Let's at least play, if you will, the car dealership game. You know, when you go into a car dealer, you say, maybe I'll buy the car, maybe I won't buy the car. I don't know what price. Give me your best deal. That's what conservatives were doing. Maybe I'll vote for a debt ceiling increase. Maybe I won't. Depends when. Give me your best deal. So what they came up with was this deal called cut, cap, and balance. Before any debt ceiling increase would happen, so totally in advance of any debt ceiling increase going into effect, you would cut spending immediately. In the bill that passed the House, it would have cut $111 billion from the current year spending at the time. It was fiscal year 2012, $111 billion, which, you know, again, compared to some of the numbers we were just talking about, relative pocket change, but a step in the right direction, and it's for this year, for fiscal year 2012. The cap portion was, it would have implemented spending caps for the next 10 years, which, if implemented as designed in the bill that passed the House, would have saved $5.8 trillion over 10 years. $5.8 trillion over 10 years. Again, doesn't solve the whole problem, but big step in the right direction. And perhaps most importantly to a lot of folks out in America, before the debt ceiling increase, Congress would have to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and send it out to the states for ratification, and not just any balanced budget amendment, but one that had a supermajority threshold for raising taxes, and one that had a spending cap as a percentage of GDP. We were saying ideally 18% of the size of the economy.